Ok, on laissera la fenêtre, la porte ouverte pour le courant. Voilà, on fait tout ce qu'on nous conseille. Bienvenue à cet déjeuner sociologique d'aujourd'hui, jeudi 15, si je ne me trompe pas, octobre 2020. C'est de nouveau un déjeuner qui est hybride. Il y a une partie qui nous suivra sur Zoom et sur YouTube, sur notre chaîne vidéo, et une partie qui est avec nous, auquel je donne le bienvenu pour cette séance. On a aujourd'hui avec nous deux chercheurs éminents. D'un côté, Manuel Mejido Costoya, qui était déjà chez nous, professeur invité il y a quelques années, ça date un peu, il a enseigné aussi à l'Université de Genève en sociologie, très apprécié par les étudiants, ceci dit. Manuel Mejido Costoya est professeur actuellement aux États-Unis, à Seattle. Le nom de l'université? Seattle University, voilà. Jésuite, ce qui montre déjà un peu une partie de son parcours. Il a fréquenté ce monde académique qui était aussi fortement influencé par la pensée jésuite, en travaillant en Chili, en Suisse évidemment, aux États-Unis, mais après aussi dans les organisations internationales, consultant de diverses agences et des Nations Unies elles-mêmes, avec une thématique qui était toujours, qu'il suivait tout le temps, en fait, la société civile qui s'organise, qui proteste, et des interactions avec les instances. Un thème qu'on avait d'ailleurs ensemble, c'était Faith-Based Organizations, on en discutait beaucoup, parce qu'il y avait une période dans laquelle, en Suisse, on discutait est-ce qu'on doit les subsidier ou non pour intervenir dans le social, avec une réponse qui était, après une longue discussion, positive, c'est-à-dire qu'il doit y avoir une multiplicité d'offres pour répondre à une pluralisation de la population en recherche de services de type social en particulier. Avec nous, comme discutante, il y a Jörg Stolz. Je me réjouis vraiment de le revoir après une longue période qu'on ne s'est plus vu. Jörg Stolz est professeur de sociologie des religions à l'Université de Lausanne, si je ne me trompe pas, aussi directeur de l'Observatoire des religions. Plus, voilà, je me trompe, du coup, il était longtemps directeur de l'Observatoire des religions. Jörg Stolz est connu en Suisse pour ses travaux sur les religions, sur les communautés, sur les mobilisations, avec une particularité que j'ai toujours beaucoup appréciée. Il thématisait des choses que les autres ne thématisaient pas du tout. Les femmes, par exemple, et le leadership des femmes dans ces organisations religieuses. Les sectes protestantes faisaient partie aussi de ces travaux. Beaucoup de choses ont été faites sur la migration qui porte le nom et la plume de Jörg Stolz. Donc, je suis très content de t'avoir ici avec nous et de t'entendre dans quelques instants. On va jouer comme toujours ces déjeuners. On aura donc une présentation conséquente de la part de Manuel sur le thème des faith-based organizations and community. Ce sera fait en anglais, j'imagine.
Oui,
voilà. Revitalization in the United States, lessons learned from an action research project que je ne connais pas, donc pour moi c'est aussi une découverte aujourd'hui. 40 minutes, 45 maximum, puis une possibilité de lancer le débat par Jörg Stolz, et puis on ouvrira. Manuel comprend parfaitement le français, donc on peut rester dans la langue de communication française si vous désirez évidemment, mais vous pouvez évidemment aussi intervenir en anglais. À toi la parole, Manuel.
Merci, Sandro. I'm going to present, as Sandro said in English, the research was realized in English, and it's just easier, as we were discussing earlier. I would like to begin by thanking the former president of the International Society for the Sociology of Religion, George Stolz, for being the discussant today. I look forward to our conversation. I will basically be presenting. We don't need to see. No, voilà. So you see. Très bien, merci. So my aim is to report on a 3-year initiative that explored faith-based responses to homelessness in Greater Seattle. It's basically chapter 2 of this forthcoming book that I'm editing with Fordham University Press. that will be published in April of 2021. For those of you that are not in sociology, maybe in theology or ethics, perhaps it's interesting for you to know that the volume is interdisciplinary in scope, social, scientific, ethical, theological approaches. And what I will be presenting is basically situated within the first part, which is FBOs, faith-based organizations, and community revitalization, the social scientific aspects. There's also a second part that deals with ethical perspective, and a third part, theological insights for homeless ministries. Again, for those of you who are interested in these type of things, the inspiration is kind of a neo-Kantian framework. The three parts correlate with the three questions Immanuel Kant poses. What can I know? What can I do? What may I hope? So now back to the more immediate chapter 2, the 3-year initiative that I will be discussing here. This is perhaps interesting. I wanted to present this to you because it has kind of the conceptual underpinnings of the study, and also a bit, so maybe I can spend some time going over it. So basically the study brings together two aspects: sociology, religion, and implementation research. For me, it's more as a scholar, sociology, religion; as a practitioner, implementation research. That kind of, I feel, holds, at least for me, in my professional work, thinking about religion and social change, writing about faith-based organizations and social welfare on the one hand, and then on the other, practicing questions related to project design and delivery, how to make projects more effective on the ground, what in the area, the field is called MEAL, monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning. So bringing these two perspectives to bear on faith-based responses to homelessness in Greater Seattle, that's kind of conceptually what's going on. Now, kind of this little dialectical thing, through that, a kind of to sociology or religion, you need to do a better job of studying implementation. We'll see what that means. To implementation research, you need to do a better job of building the capacity of faith-based organizations. That's kind of what's on what is from the side of sociology or religion, a question that's there is, do faith-based organizations make unique contributions to community revitalization? It's a question, form of maybe of a research question. A hypothesis is homelessness is not just a brick and mortar issue. It's about right relationship. And I just cite here the work of a well-known sociologist of religion, H. Richard Niebuhr, the brother of the more well-known Reinhold Niebuhr. The instrumental value of faith for society is dependent upon faith's conviction that it has more than instrumental value. So from the side of sociology and religion. From the side of implementation research, going to John Dewey's questions about channels of effective operation. Democracy is about effective operation, operationalizing the ideal of democracy. So how to make FBOs channels of effective operation? My claim is FBO resources to address homelessness are not being adequately leveraged. And I just cite here a passage where in Public and Its Interest, John Dewey cites the importance of different, what we would call today, different sectors of society, including religion. Now, just very briefly, I struggled here because this is a very US specific research, and I'm presenting it here in the University of Geneva. So I just wanted to present some some questions that I thought would be interesting. Just here's some geography. Basically, I am going to be talking about a research project in Greater Seattle, which is the broader area is Puget Sound, and the still broader area is the Pacific Northwest. Okay, so Pacific Northwest, Puget Sound, Greater Seattle, just some interesting satellite images of the Puget Sound region. Now, Greater Seattle is a technical, it's linked to a technical notion of metropolitan statistical area. By Greater Seattle, I mean the Seattle-Tacoma Bellevue metropolitan statistical area. Just for clarification, that consists of 3 counties: King County, which seats Seattle; Snohomish County to the north, Pierce County to the south. So that's the area that we studied. Just some images if you have never been out there of in the Pacific Northwest, Seattle, of different cities. The mountain there is Mount Rainier. Just how you wanted to share. Now, just very briefly, I will again. I thought it would be interesting, but it's not going to be feasible given the time available to do justice to situating the research project in the form of maybe premises that I will stipulate because I don't have time to substantiate them, maybe as a framework. Again, given that we're here in Geneva, Switzerland, in Europe. And then I want to spend the most of the, so I'm going to go rather quickly through the first 3 points. Okay, and we can go back to them if you're interested later, but I will spend the majority of the time in the unpacking, the actual research project and the 6 insights, in particular from the project. Now, situating, just very briefly, in the form of a claim, Greater Seattle's homelessness crisis exemplifies the dilemmas of late modern urban life in the US, United States, and especially the growing disparities in booming tech hubs. So questions here about increasing disparities, particularly after the Great Recession. A lot has been written about growing inequalities in the United States. Economists, Joseph Stiglitz, Paul Krugman, Jeffrey Sachs, etc. It's usually framed as growing inequality between cities. No? So the thing is the innovation economy versus the industrialization. No? So Silicon Valley, Apple Park, Cupertino versus Detroit, no, the Rust Belt, old deindustrialized zones. I just think it's important, and I mean that to think about the homelessness issue as growing inequalities within cities, and in particular technology hubs. No, so here we get to the determinants of homelessness in the United States along the West Coast and the housing crisis. Interestingly enough, in booming technology hubs, Seattle is one. Santa Clara, that houses Google headquarters, is another. Homelessness encampment outside of Google headquarters, you know, Googleville. Now, reflecting on that, Seattle, when you take it as a share of the total population, Seattle has the largest share of homeless individuals of all the major top US cities, top US metropolitan statistical areas. Seattle has the 3rd largest homeless population, but the 18th largest total population. So when you look at this bar chart, half are West Coast cities. Half, Seattle, LA, San Francisco, San Jose, San Diego are West Coast cities, and half are top 5 technology hubs according to metrics of innovation economy. Interesting, no? Now, just finishing that, related to that, I provide here, I'm sorry for the poor quality of the image. This is a part of a report that was published by the well-known consultancy firm McKinsey in 2008, studying Seattle, and it shows basically the direct correlation between increase in real GDP, increase in fair market rents, the 2 trend lines, and increase in homelessness, which is the bar chart. Right? So when you think about Microsoft, Amazon, Starbucks, these things, this is the unintended consequences of a tech boom. Now that's just backdrop, we're not going to get into it. So that's the first point. Second point, faith-based organizations have historically made and continue to make important contributions to US civic life. Now there's a thesis that I'm just going to go quickly through it. Perhaps some of you who have studied sociology or religion interested in these issues know about the questions sociologists or religion grapple with concerning faith-based organization, religion, and civic life. Beginning as point of departure, Alexis de Tocqueville's thesis. No, in the mid 1800s, in La Démocratie en Amérique, in opposition to the European case. It's the twin clauses of disestablishment and free exercise that made religion an important civic force. Okay, so that's one aspect. Paradoxically, because it's separation of church and state, that's one notion. Related to that, you can just see that religion has always been at the center of U.S. Civic life. Different ideals of faith in public and different notions of the good of government. A more evangelical move of social entrepreneur linked to liberal democratic pursuit of negative rights on the one hand, and then the other, the more kind of prophetic mainline progressive Christianity correlated with the positive rights of civic republicanism. Now, it's interesting that religion has also, some have argued, been linked to to shaping the very social structures in the US. Thinking in terms of welfare, comparative welfare state analyses. For example, the sociologist of religion, Seymour Martin Lipset, argues the key role of FBOs in US public life can be traced to a system of denominational pluralism, voluntary religious congregation that facilitated the emergence of a privately or auto-regulated civil society and an anti-statist liberal welfare regime. If you think in terms of typologies of, for example, Esping, Anderson, this is the liberal weak welfare system. Also religion, this is more directly related to conceptualizing the study. The notion of public religion, I cite Jose Casanova, who basically, the idea here is that faith-based organizations in the United States point to a unique process of secularization, where on the one hand, you have the transformation of individual beliefs and practices, and on the other, not necessarily the privatization of religion. Kind of a paradoxical claim. How is that possible? Well, the key is, I would submit something like this. You have to think about it, the religion and public life from an individual level on the left, but also from an organizational level on the right. When you look at it on the left, you see the increase in nuns, religiously non-affiliated. It's the same case in Western Europe and in Switzerland. There's a decrease in the number of, for example, Christians. But on the other hand, in the United States, when you look at religious faith-based organizations, not in individual religion, but you see an increase in the role, for example, I just provide here one example, the role of faith-based organizations, lobbying organizations inside Washington, D.C. increase there. And there are other studies. So I think that's important. Linked to that, this is perhaps a study that I coordinated. Perhaps it could be understood as a natural experiment in the nun zone. The nun zone is what is a moniker for the Pacific Northwest because of the United States, because the US region, it's the US region with the historically the largest prevalence of religious nuns. Historically has always been the case, and it continues to do so, to be the case. So I say, perhaps, is this a glimpse into the future of religion in the US? Puget Sound, I argue, Puget Sound offers a natural experiment to study the civic engagement of faith-based organizations in a context that captures what at the national level is a transformation in individual religiosity. So now the third and final premise claim, the increasing sway of business and civil society actors presents new opportunities for faith-based organizations as co-producers of responses to pressing social issues. So sociology of religion to the side, now urban planning, public policy, something you know very well, that I take as the framework. The increased devolution and network governance. Vertical pivot downward from state to local governments, horizontal pivot outwards from state to networks of business, civil society, and public organizations. These are the two kind of elements that are, in a sense, providing new opportunities and challenges for faith-based organizations. Now, this I don't have time to go into, but this is something that that is a conceptual framework that was developed throughout the research project, and it had a kind of rather powerful descriptive kind of force. That in this context of devolution and network governance, there is the challenge of blending and pooling knowledge and resources. the blurring of boundaries between public, private, and community responses. I cite here two works and two different ways of approaching this arena of possible innovation and experimentalism. That is, no, on the one hand, the claim of expertise of scientists and local knowledge of communities are increasingly being tried to blend. On the other hand, the bottom-up civic engagement that is adaptable, coming from more grassroots oriented and top-down programming, is also how do you blend and put them together. This I will return to, as this is important. Now, I won't develop this, but much has been written about the so-called post-secular condition. That to me, it's a bit, given what I said about the sociology of religion, I find the post-secular condition claimed to be somewhat not as obvious to apply to the United States. But if we were to apply something like that, then again, linked to blending local knowledge and expertise on the one hand, and different types of organizations on the other one, religion, perhaps in a post-secular world, are becoming catalyzers of local knowledge and stakeholders and network governance, which brings different kind of opportunities and challenges of this post-secular condition. So that said, I want to now focus the rest of my time here on the actually unpacking of the research project. Okay, I'm sorry I rushed through it, but I wanted to get to this. Now we can spend some more time on this aspect. So I will just unpack it in three parts. So beginning with the first part, this is what orients the first part. Oriented by the Action Research Framework, the objective of the 3-year initiative on faith-based responses to homelessness in Greater Seattle was capacity building and curricular enhancement. In other words, it was about generating usable knowledge in collaboration with local faith-based organizations. You're thinking already, research, action research is looming large. So for example, I provide here one of the initiatives that I organized as part of this research, one of the kind of research deliverables. So there were two aspects. One was to strengthen the capacity of these faith-based organizations to be more effective catalyzers of social change, and on the other, use that usable knowledge to teach courses, to build the skills of nonprofit executives, religious leaders, urban planners, so professional development courses. This is one of the courses that brought together professional development interests and also faith-based organizations. Now, just in terms of action research, this is how in my mind, I see two different approaches. One, what we can call participatory action research, which for me, it's closely related to Paulo Freire and Orlando Fausto Borda, which is about empowering disenfranchised groups. You have the framework in your mind, for example, kind of a phenomenology of spirit, and Freire, this kind of revolutionary rupture. And on the other, there's a kind of a variant that's more about community, that I call community-based participatory research, which is about building the capacity of local stakeholders for community improvement. And that's oriented by a more kind of a pragmatist reformist gradualism. It's about effective project implementation. I mean, I think that's how in my mind, I think this is, it's important to disentangle action research. And to me, it's more on the community-based participatory research aspect that we kind of organize the work. Now, the initiative, the study, was developed into two phases. You have there the two phases on this screen. One phase was basically a study of faith-based responses to homelessness, and it was oriented by grounded theory. The second phase was an actual capacity building pilot with faith-based organizations, and it was oriented by community-based participatory research. So the grounded theory, the two-year grounded theory that emerged, provided the conceptual underpinnings for then the faith-based, the capacity building initiative that lasted a year. So I will now discuss these two moments. The first phase, the grounded theory, and the second phase, the actual pilot oriented by community-based participatory research. An assertion. So during the first phase of the initiative, a theoretical sampling strategy was developed, in and through which emerged a picture of Puget Sound faith-based organizations as community problem solvers. This idea of community problem solver is a kind of a theoretical picture that I will now sketch in. So basically, just what the methodologically, for those of you that are interested, this is what was involved, typical of grounded theory. As you know, since the beginning, Glaser and Strauss mentioned, it has to be a multifaceted investigation mixed, and we did that. Compilation of data, 139 local FBOs and 29 non-sectarian organizations, 78 site visits, 35 interviews. So just this, I think, it's important. So through our analysis and coding, we found most substantively that faith-based organizations have tended, in Puget Sound, have tended to focus on providing for the immediate needs of unhoused individuals. That has been well documented in studies. Increasingly, however, they are aspiring to proactively enhance, for example, social protection systems and address the systemic causes of homelessness, like, for example, contribute to creating affordable housing. That is a substantive thing. So the main puzzle that our theory building grappled with was that the FBOs were grappling with, and we were trying to frame, was how do these FBOs achieve these more ambitious objectives given limited resources and capacities? That's a question that emerged, and when you look at the research, the literature, the research, there's not a lot out there in the States. When I'm thinking about the research, I'm thinking specifically of research on FBOs and community revitalization in the States. Now, these are the four categories that we developed to kind of frame this puzzle. And I will just very quickly go through this because I want to spend the rest of the time on the pilot lessons learned. So basically, four categories emerged as we, through our coding. One is this organization institutional analysis, the importance of it. Second is a distinction between congregations and nonprofits. Third is the notion of civic capacity. And fourth, then, community problem solvers, when you're oriented by these three earlier claims. Now, in terms of organizational, institutional approach, the majority of the studies in the United States are grounded in a methodological individualism. Okay, and so I provide here three levels. The national study by Robert Putnam and Campbell, I think it's called American Grace, How Religion Divides and Unites Us, published in 2010. Social capital, individual religious beliefs and practices. Religion, you know the argument. Religion is positively correlated with philanthropy, with the volunteering. A study, the most well-known study of religion in public life in the Pacific Northwest, marshals a neo-Weberian perspective that correlates religious worldviews and social action, and comes out with a typology that I have there between civic-minded mainline versus evangelical entrepreneurs. For those of you that study these things, this is a kind of pretty standard kind of approach. The problem that emerges is that this basically our field work, the organization didn't fit into that. No? Now, our field research in Greater Seattle found that faith-based responses were framed by faith-based organizations and also by government agencies, by non-sectarian organizations, also from a point of view of voluntaristic ethic. For example, religion, oh yeah, let's invite this charismatic influencer, this charismatic religious individual to the meeting, or let's leverage volunteers in congregations. Well, that's interesting, but that doesn't, I would argue, doesn't get to the heart of the matter. So we need to focus on an institutional organizational perspective. And from that perspective, two different models emerge. I'm drawing here Robert Wuthnow's Saving America, which was an early book published in the aftermath of the charitable choice movement in the US, where he presents a similar typology. We need to think about congregations as caring communities that are oriented by fixed set of shared values, developed over a long period of time, yet they lack specialized knowledge and resources to scale up soul work into social work. For philanthropy to transforming unjust structures. Then on the other hand, a faith-based nonprofits, which in the United States tax code are called 501c3s, basically exempt. That's a paragraph that exempts organizations. These are arm's length, contractual, professional client. And this, again, from a neo-institution's point of view, is the isomorphism set in. So the challenge becomes operationalizing religious beliefs and practices given the isomorphisms of the nonprofit field. Now, this is an example taken from our field work that organizations that we were in conversation with. On the one, you have the congregation, and I provide here the most relatively formal one. This is the Bridge Care Center, which is a social outreach arm of an evangelical church named by the name of Quest Church. It has 4 staff, more or less, a handful of volunteers, and more or less a budget of about $100,000 US dollars. On the other hand, in terms of faith-based organizations, the famed Catholic Community Services, the official human service outreach arm of the Catholic Church in Western Washington, in the United States, the second largest FBO in the state of Washington. I think the first is World Vision. It has 3,636 staff, many volunteers, and a budget of 176 million. 76% of which comes from government contracts. Studies, don't have time to get into this, but studies, very important studies that have contributed to this question, I would say have focused on one or the other. I think the challenge is to bring both together because they are trying to collaborate, as we will see, how to work together. Now, the last kind of little piece of the puzzle is beyond contestation and deliberation. We need to focus on civic capacity, which is focusing on implementation. I would say that the majority of the studies that look at religion and faith-based organizations and social welfare systems in the United States have focused on a contestatory model, like advocacy, contestation, or a deliberative model that is one of mutual understanding via dialogue and deliberation. Categories here, you see instrumental reason, instrumental action, communicative action. The point is that they're both kind of linked on social capital, and they do not get to the question of implementation. So I propose here, following on the work of Xavier de Sosa Briggs and others, the notion of civic capacity, which is not social capital, it's civic capacity to devise and implement means of acting together. So contestation, FBOs are critics of government. They go to they protest or they do an advocacy campaign. Deliberation, they provide gatherings or statements, inter-ecumenical, inter-religious statement on homelessness. In terms of civic capacity, they are engaging in effective public action. For example, trying to roll out an emergency shelter or job insertion initiative. These are 3 examples. Just bringing it home. I just provide 3 examples of this type of one example of each of this kind of typology. So contestation, it's the Temple Beth Am participating in Interfaith Advocacy Day in Olympia. Contestation here in the sense, not necessarily in the sense of, pluralistic bargaining, to use the notion of Robert Dowd's notion. It's not necessarily agonistic. In terms of deliberation, associated ministries of Tacoma, who organized to write a declaration concerning our homeless sisters and brothers by religious leaders. And finally, Alki Church, the United Church of Christ, with collaboration with a sanctioned encampment in Seattle, build tiny houses, the little small houses, and put them on church land and other parts. See the difference. I would suggest that not enough time has been given to studying civic FPOs from the civic capacity point of view. So from here emerges this idea of community problem solvers. FPOs as community problem solvers are basically trying to catalyze effective social change by marshaling civic capacity, working together with government and other stakeholders to provide innovative responses. And here emerges the two elements that are, I think, important. On the one hand, pooling local and professional knowledge together, local knowledge on homelessness, technical knowledge on homelessness, and then also integrating the adaptive features of bottom-up civic engagement and the complexity of top-down programming. So that's the first part. Now, oriented by that, I developed, we rolled out a capacity building pilot that sought during the second phase of the initiative, a capacity building pilot was rolled out, anchored in the elements of the emergent grounded theory, and framed as community-based participatory research. So here was this idea of community-based participatory research as collective problem solving through an intentionally experimental design. This is what we developed. It was basically, we developed a pilot where faith-based organizations would come together to discuss, to develop civic capacity. They would learn from each other through different iterations of problem solving, actually grappling with different issues that they're facing. And this is some logistics, basically, of the project. We sent out invitations to 170 FPOs. We selected 23 individuals from 22 organizations. They gathered once a month for several months, and the meetings were structured around presentation of a project and puzzle, problem solving, and updates from earlier iterations. This is some characteristics for those of you who are interested of the 23 participants and organizations. 11 were executive directors or congregational heads. 12 were managers of homeless operations. 22 of the organization, 19 were FPOs, 3 were non-sectarian. 19 FPOs, 12 nonprofits, 6 congregations, 1 denominational body. Well, I'll hopefully be able to get to that. That didn't fit quite into one of the 2 congregation nonprofit. 19 of the FPOs, 16 were Christian, 2 Muslim, 1 Jewish. out of 16 Christians, 7 mainline, 6 evangelical, 3 Catholic. These are just some photos of the working groups in action. I thought you would just like to, just basically presenting projects and problem solving. Okay, so now the final here, bringing the last section is the 6 lessons learned from the working group process. I won't have time to do justice to the 6 lessons, but I want to get through them because I think they are. I find them to be very interesting. So these were I think of them as pathways through which civic capacity, usable knowledge was fostered. The first one, first lesson learned: faith-based organizations are turning to community economic development strategies. They are becoming participants in the social and solidarity economy. They are moving from assistance to assets, from mere providing assistance to building assets and value. Two examples of types of community economic development strategy. One was religious land redevelopment, which is a puzzle that congregations were grappling with. We have this land available. We want to, how can we build affordable housing on this land? St. Luke's Episcopal Church in the neighborhood of Ballard is grappling with in this land that they already developed it into a kind of a green space. They have a very ambitious project. So this St. Luke's Episcopal Church, a congregation, is grappling with the technical, lacks there the technical knowledge to actually implement this project, and so they are trying to figure out how to move forward with this religious land redevelopment. The other is social business creation. As an example, this is New Horizons Ministry, which is a non-profit organization in Seattle that's linked with the evangelical communities that developed street bean coffee. It's basically a coffee shop, you see it there, that trains and employs homeless youth. They work with homeless youth. Their main work, New Horizons Ministry, is shelter. They wanted to they say, well, shelter, how do we get to the heart of the problem? How do we get not just treating the symptoms, but treat the causes? Well, we need employment, decent work. So they're grappling, well, can we take the scale of street bean? Can we open up other street beans? These homeless youth are trained, they work, and they live above. How do we, given our limited capacity, how do we balance this? That's one kind of lesson. Second lesson, faith-based organizations are attempting to enhance the delivery of social services. So this is related really to social protection. And this is where perhaps most loomed large, the whole puzzle of bringing local knowledge to bear. And those of you that are interested, that study questions of social protection and social policy, know that, for example, the question, how do quantitative research is important, well, qualitative ethnographic kind of assessment of social protection systems to ensure effective delivery and quality are also important. The FBO, that's linked to the local knowledge aspect. So there are two types of two clusters that emerged here in this area. One was actually trying to improve the targeting and delivery of social services, and the other is enhancing the quality, coherence, and effectiveness of social service. This has, I think, this has some rather descriptive power. The example of the first is Everett Gospel Mission in the city of Everett, which was looking to train what they call paranavigators in local churches. That is a resource so that social service could be communicated to local individuals. And then the other one was Muslim Housing Services, that was trying to create job placement programs for its homeless clients that were looking for work. The majority of these were either immigrants or first or second generation immigrants or refugees. Third lesson learned: the larger faith-based nonprofits serve as important intermediaries. The literature on civil society, a lot is said about civil society as intermediaries. What I'm thinking here is intermediaries in a very specific sense of twofold mediation. On the one hand, these large FBOs were trying to link stakeholders, civil society or government, to local congregations, and on the other, pooling congregational resources to channel structured participation. So on the one hand, non-sectarian linking to, and government linking to local congregations, on the other, cluster of congregations under, for example, associated ministries. And these are the two examples that I give. One is the Spearhead Campaign to End Family Homelessness, where Associated Ministries, working with over 250 local congregations. Associated Ministries is a very large nonprofit in Tacoma that basically was trying to find a way to pool the knowledge, the action and commitment of 250 local organizations. The second one is Catholic Community Services of Western Washington, where had developed this program they called Network Builder, to try to bring the technical knowledge of Catholic Community Service to local parishes, and the local knowledge of local parishes up to community service, so as to integrate the two. This is the whole notion of the network builder. There were network builders from Catholic Community Services that work with local Catholic parishes to develop programs. The fourth, I will not have time to get to this one, but interesting one is the convening and coordinating role of denominational bodies is undervalued. So there were